Welcome to COGGS. We're joined by Dr. Swasti Rao, who is a Europe specialist, and also she's a specialist in Indo-Pacific region. She traveled widely and researched in the regions in Japan. One of her area of research includes Ukraine, where she's been recently. Dr. Rao, welcome to COGGS. We'll be first asking you about the Global South and Europe. You're a Europe specialist. Do you think a country, when you call Europe the most successful economic bloc, do you think it has an effect and influence in the Global South region?
So when you say Europe as a geo-economic bloc, I think it's successful not in an absolute sense, but in a relative sense, because we did try with these experiments like the SARC, for example, or other these kind of regional groups, or ASEAN, for example. But by that comparison, perhaps what the most successful has been the EU, which is European Union, which is a free movement of goods and services and people, etc. Not to say that it doesn't have problems or it doesn't have shortcomings, but in a relative sense, it has been the most successful example of regional integration in that sense. Now, very quickly, when it comes to Global South, I think the thing that needs to be highlighted upon is that the EU has primarily functioned as a geo-economic bloc. And because of its geo-economic push or geo-economic concentration, it has also been a developmental partner to many of these countries in the world that are in the developing world. So even you may have heard of this instrument called the European Investment Bank, the EIB, and also different other member states and different other European programs that identify a lot of projects in the developing South, in the developing world, let's call it the developing world, including India, and then they try to bring funds, and then they mobilize funds, and they look at fill those gaps when it comes to the development gaps. So particularly when you say Global South, I think the counter question to my mind is that the Global South itself can be a very misleading category, because what really is the definition of the Global South? If you mean the group of countries that are developing, that's one, because a lot of times that is the kind of a sweeping generalization that is exploited and manipulated by countries like China, that are absolutely in every other way a great power, but then would like to club themselves as developing South and Global South, because they want to retain the leadership of the bloc. So I think when you say the Global South, I think we mean countries that are genuinely the developing world, that don't have the capabilities, that are also extremely vulnerable to the great power contestation, and that have been basically at the receiving end of the geopolitical turmoils of our times. So in that respect, especially from the EU's perspective, I told you about the EIB, the instrument with which they are doing the developmental projects. And the second is that the EU is also heavily into a lot of connectivity projects, that are identifying these gaps and building infrastructure, whether it's in the Pacific or the Pacific Rim countries or Africa or Latin America. I mean, very recently they signed an FTA with Kosovo, which is a group of 4 South American countries, Brazil, Argentina, Paraguay. So the EU does a lot of these things.
And a lot of observer members do.
Yes. I mean, it has that, and that kind of somewhere tells you that the most important vertical for their foreign policy actions has been the development.
Yes, just now you mentioned about Mercosur, and there are AU, there are also ECOWAS there. Yeah. So do you think this regional integrity is basically slaying the pan global Southism short of essence? Is it killing the entire notion of the concept of global South?
So, I mean...
are they fragmented very much?
I mean, of course, Global South, in my opinion, if you ask me, Global South is a fragmented concept, because like I said, how do you first define the Global South? When you get into defining, and what are the geographical boundaries of the Global South? Is it an economic
construct?
Is it an economic construct? Is it a colonial? Is it a post-colonial construct, right? Is it or is it a geographical construct? Now, we all agree that it is not a geographical construct, right? I mean, it is not about countries pertaining to a particular geography or the countries of the Global South. I think it should be based on largely economic and markers, for example, and also about where is and developmental markers, right? That would perhaps tell you. Naturally, because the world had a particular geopolitics, there was colonialism and imperialism. So most of the countries in the Global South would be countries that are emerged from the colonial and imperial experiences, India being one, of course. But Having said that, I think in the current, in the current times, it makes more sense to find out economic markers and indicators to identify what are the countries that are vulnerable, and they are across regions. So, I mean, if you look at the Americas, you know that the South Americas, the Central Americas are a completely different ballgame compared to North America. If you look at Europe, even Europe, by the way, for example, not many people understand, is that the West Europe is not the same as East Europe or Central Eastern Europe, because in fact China played that game for a long time. That China, through its 17+1 mechanism, tried to divide the European Union by concentrating its investments in countries that were not at par with the Western European partners. And it's another thing that it did not, it kind of fell short of expectations, and it was always about over-promise and under-development. And 17+1 is not working fine. But what I'm saying is that even within the developed European bloc, there is something called their own global south. Okay? They may not,
interesting.
Yeah, I mean, they may not like it because the European Union likes to project this.
So there's an otherizing factor.
I mean, there is a power distribution, and it's not equal. It's not an egalitarian power distribution. The European engine is basically driven by the Franco-German alliance, right? And now Italy, of course. But now, if you see what has happened after the war in Ukraine, the emergence of Poland, the Poland right now is the most, I would say, promising economy right now. Germany has been into recession. The rest of the big economies are facing problems. Similarly, you have to understand that, then when you come to the other side, for example, look at South Asia. I think it's very, very clear that most of the South Asian nations are anyway products of the colonial rule, and they form, most of the countries of the global South. And when you say and I didn't come to Africa, but then it's a very obvious example of that.
So, Dr. Rao, do you think after this war in Ukraine and a confluence of events like Red Sea and then Syria and also in between Gaza crisis, do you think this it is propelling a lot of countries and then prompting a lot of countries to secure themselves to import more arms, especially from the global south? Countries are feeling insecure.
Yes, absolutely.
Could you explain something about what is the arms import and also the flow from the West?
Yeah. I mean, so I can't overstate the fact that what has been happening after COVID, okay, especially after COVID, there was a lull of 2 years during COVID, and ever since we've only been seeing wars and militarization and more wars and more militarization. I can't overstate the fact that there is a huge hike in how countries are trying to ramp up their military capabilities, including India. In fact, I would be of the opinion that India is not doing enough actually to ramp up its military capabilities. India should really work up its military and defense spending. As far as the global arms trades are concerned, I think frankly right now there is too much pressure on the global military national complex. I mean, there are delays, there are backlogs to clear. Whether you take the example of Dassault Aviation that is giving us Rafale materials, I mean, none of that is coming anytime soon because there is so much backlog on them to clear. Similarly, look at the GE404 jet engine deal from the US. It's a great thing on paper, but they are not able to deliver because there are so many backlogs to clear. Look at the S-400s released from Russia. They are not able to give us because the military industrial complex is under a lot of strain. So what I'm saying is that yes, today we are living in a very dangerous world. We will see more militarization. You see Armenia, for example. Now, India is the biggest defense supplier to Armenia. Okay, number 2 is France. And the interesting bit is that this geopolitical turmoil has unfortunately also opened avenues for India. So, I mean, if you look at the way Indian defense exports have gone up, and Modi keeps releasing its figures, it's quite impressive.
India's Ministry of Defense.
Ministry of Defense keeps releasing its figures. In fact, if I'm not wrong, only a couple of days ago they brought out their data, a lot of things. So you can see that India is now also transitioning from being a net importer of weapons and
to the defense exporter.
Yeah, to now being a net defense exporter. And when you talk about defense exports, everybody is surprised that more than 50% of our defense exports are going to the US, which actually tells that there is a lot of scope in the world to absorb India's defense exports. I mean, why is it what is happening in Armenia, what is happening in France, or what is happening in the US is actually opening that space up. Now, can
Global South import more?
Yeah, so Global South, yes. I mean, look at Global South, look at Philippines and Vietnam, for example. India is now sending them BrahMos. See, end of the day, one has to understand something. Now, wars can open up or close down opportunities. Wars can affect trade which are the countries that are at the receiving end of that stress. For example, India's biggest exporter used to be Russia, but in the last 10 years it has
diversified from France.
Yeah, it has fallen down because India wants to diversify and India also wants to indigenize. Okay, but at the same time, it doesn't mean to say that Russia is becoming irrelevant. No, Russia is still the number one supplier. But in the near future, we will try to diversify as much as possible because the idea is to build resilience.
Yeah, one of the reasons is there are a lot of agents weaponry, which is
true, and we would like
more than 60 years.
Yeah. So I mean, there are reasons. We don't have time to get into what made Russia the number one supplier, but for sure, Russia has been the number one supplier for decades. Okay, and it's a different thing that now we have. We don't want to be in a dependence kind of a relationship. But very quickly, how does it do for global south? I think it also somewhere shows that today in the world there is a lot of capacity to absorb a lot of defense exports. So just to give you a small example. For the global south countries, I think even though it is not discussed much, but this entire supply of the 155 ships, now a lot of this trade is also happening off the record, but basically it just shows that you don't have to be a king in some technical expertise, or you don't have to have like a technical expertise in order to become an exporter. So this is like making use of the strategic opening. So even if you're able to make 122 ships, 155 ships, there is a market for that.
Do you think the global south spends enough for their security, or they're spending too much rather than their health budget and the development budget?
Well, the global south is definitely not spending too much on the security, and frankly, they can't, because even if they were to
are they forced to choose, by the way?
Yeah. That's so that is the nitty-gritty of the great power contestation. I don't think everybody buys that idea. Please, I don't think that at all, because if you look at the pitch of countries like India, if you even look at the pitch of countries like France, for example, if you look at the EU's, I can give you these examples of Indo-Pacific strategies. All of these say categorically that we intend to lessen the great power contestation in Indo-Pacific, and we intend to give a kind of a third way out, okay, so that the entire region can be more secure. As far as the great power contestation is concerned, what we have realized is that no matter how much the US or China push, okay, these countries don't want to take a side. That applies to India, that applies to ASEAN, that applies to so many more countries, that applies to a lot of countries in the Middle East. And I think the West has to somewhere understand that you can't push, and it's as much to the West as much to China and others, that they don't want to take sides. And for them, consequential hedging is probably the most optimum strategy, because the way the global situations are changing. So very quickly, are they spending enough? I don't think they have the means to spend enough, and they don't have the means to also get into like really expensive weapon platforms, unless they are at war with somebody. Like that's what you see in the case of Armenia, for example, that they are into this massive modernization now. But at the same time, what can really be... See, the military-industrial complex will always try to sell you weapons. They will always try to say that there is a security dilemma. You must do this, you must do that. I think.
So, will there be sales season in the global south for drones? Do you think?
Yeah, I think where the investments need to go to the right place. Okay, and for sure, if you are a country that doesn't have that kind of money but still has some kind of threat perception and a threat environment, it makes more sense for tactical investments. And I see in that regard. Definitely drones are going to be the next big thing. There is no doubt about it. Whether it's the air drones, the UAVs, or whether it's the underwater drones. I think that is where the investment should go, and that's why the drone companies will go.
Dr. Rao, you're a specialist of war tactics as well, other than Indo-Pacific. Is it anywhere possible to identify a couple of risk-prone areas from Southeast Asia and in Africa?
Yeah, so very quickly, when it comes to Africa, let me tackle that first. See, when it comes to Africa, you know that Africa is a very contested region by itself. There is problem in Sudan, South Sudan, Darfur. I mean, these are long-standing, decades-old problems, and nobody really has a solution to that, right? You also now have a problem with Syria, right? I mean, the Syria, if you look carefully, Syria, nearby Libya, I mean, all these regions are very unstable. They are also developing as shadow markets for a lot of illegal arms exports, drugs, etc., etc. Now, despite that, when I see how the great power politics unfolds in this region, it is going to be about critical mining of critical and rare earth. Okay, and that is where the scramble for Africa will begin again, because for the longest time, China has been the only major player. But if you see now, the West is also now spending a lot of concentration money. Biden was in Africa, by the way, last week or last to last week. So why do you think this is happening? Because everybody understands that the future is with the global digital order, right? Whoever dominates the global digital order will come to dominate both the global economic order and the global security order. That is the nature of technology today, that it cuts across. It has civilian purposes, economic purposes, military purposes, all encompassing. So, because of that, we all see that the critical rare earth is required for making these semiconductors and complex semiconductors, and that is why this is where I think the global attention is.
Also, there are lithiums and.
That's what I'm saying. So, also lithium is required for all your EVs. So,
yes.
There is no getting away from the fact that the next scramble is going to be for that, and Africa is just the ideal theatre for it. And I do see, for that. So I think when it comes to Africa, it is going to be more on these things. It is less going to be on classic weapon sales, etc. I mean, of course, we all know that some kind of weapon, because the military industrial complex will always find markets to sell its weapons, but that is not going to be the mainstay. I think the mainstay is going to be on this critical mining. And with that, you will see a lot of non-state actors becoming active, because the Wagner, that's what the Wagner group is doing in Central Africa, right? They are into mining of diamonds, mining of golds, and they also control a lot of these other mining. So that is for Africa, because Africa is a very resource-rich region, and we see that in the in Southeast Asia, for example, I mean, in Indo-Pacific region, for example. You already see the way the situation, that's the other example to ask for, right? I mean, in
exactly.
So you already see that ASEAN is going to be divided, okay? Because China plays this dividing.
I mean, politically or geoeconomically?
No, I mean politically, because within ASEAN there are certain countries that definitely that play on the Chinese side, right? And there are countries that play on the Western side. And why do you think that Vietnam and Philippines are buying weapons from India? Philippines definitely has a very
strong stance against China.
Against China, because the
Maritime border,
the South China Sea, exactly. There has been a problem with respect to EEZ claims. Now, I see that the total militarization of the Indo-Pacific theater will definitely rise. There is no doubt about it. Japan, look at the big player called Japan. It was unthinkable. I mean, I've lived in Japan for 5 years. That they would come up with something like their national security strategy, national defense strategy, the way they have 2022, 2023, where they have actually deployed long-range missiles. If you know Japan, you know that they have an Article 9 which doesn't allow them to get into these offensive capabilities, but even then they can. So massive militarization, you look at North Korean stockpiles. The fact that North Korea is selling so many of its stockpiles to Russia for the war.
If it's possible, if you could kindly explain what is North Korea's defense capabilities.
I mean, North Korea's defense capability. North Korea is a closed book, in many ways, and a lot of people have been trying to open and read the book. Very quickly, North Korea, there is a lot of saber rattling as well, because it's so closed, right? So as long as you don't understand what the real capabilities are, you can saber rattle and say that projectors are bigger than you are. But for sure, what is happening is that North Korea has thousands and thousands of, warheads. And what has happened lately is that North Korea has been very reckless. If you look at the leadership, they have been very reckless in trying to trigger, a security crisis in the region. And that has been one of the reasons why Japan has actually now got these capabilities. Coming to North Korea again, I think what has happened lately is that all these exports that they are sending to Russia, it is the quid pro quo is that Russia then supports them to develop their nuclear program, and that should concern everybody. And that is, in fact, one of South Korea's biggest concern. Okay, so North Korea's defense capabilities, even though they are old weapons or something, but they still have formidable weapons and thousands of stockpiles. And you see that impacting the Russia-Ukraine war today, because it's not just the ammunition, but it's also a lot of missiles that Russia is getting from North Korea. And now also troops. So we will see that these kind of things are very, very destabilizing. This is about North Korea. This will also lead to more militarization and more acquisition, both for South Korea, Japan, and others. And we can't be really waiting and sitting on 20 or 30-year-old decisions. I think that is where we really, despite all our talent and all our, intellect and all our otherwise, all our awareness, I think that's where we really lose, which is that time is also a vector, and you cannot discount time when you're talking about military capabilities.
Indeed. Dr. Rao, do you think Russia is winning in this war when it comes to special operation in Ukraine, and is Wagner group contributed to it?
So very quickly, when it comes to getting the 18 or 22% of Ukrainian land is concerned, I think Russia has won that land. So in that sense, I do see it as a tactical victory for Russia. There is no doubt about it. It is. But geopolitically, I don't see, honestly.
And this is a setback for NATO as well.
It's a setback for NATO because NATO's help to Ukraine could not enable Ukraine to hold on to its 18 or 22% of territory. But geopolitically, I don't see how it is a big benefit for Russia, because geopolitically, the NATO membership has grown, and also the Black Sea Fleet has seen a lot of losses. So geopolitically speaking, I don't see how it has helped Russia. I mean, Russian military-industrial complex, the export base has fallen. India used to be the biggest buyer. We are not able to buy because of all these issues. So geopolitically, I don't think it's a very placed decision. But like I said, tactically for Ukraine, particularly that 18-22% of land, I don't see that land coming back to Ukraine.
Dr. Rao, how do you oversee the relations between Europe or EU with the nations like China and Iran? Because there are a lot of roots to it with both the countries. Like China has a lot of involvement in European affairs.
So the involvement is basically only economic, and if you look at the European Union and its nature as a geo-economic bloc, that sheer development of EU as a geo-economic bloc has come in a parallel development to three dependencies. One dependency for its security on NATO and the US, for its cheap gas on Russia, and for its manufacturing and markets to China. And China for decades has been EU has not been the only miscalculator here. The US also miscalculated. Nixon also miscalculated how China's opening up is going to impact the world. Nobody thought there would be a 2012 and a Xi Jinping coming to power and this entire Chinese dream unfolding, which is going to create so much instability in the world, including for India. Now, going back, China has, because of its policies of over subsidies and killing competition, China has and let me also give this to the Chinese, that they have also innovated, in time, and they have completely got the European manufacturing dependent on themselves. So China has become the manufacturing hub of the world. Okay, and why did the companies shift to China? Because it was cheaper to basically manufacture the same thing in China compared to the same thing in Europe, because the labor standards were higher and everything. And China doesn't care about all of that. So very quickly, when it comes to China, China has always capitalized on its economic statecraft, and it has always been very shrewd in trying to maximize the gains that it can from getting these other big countries dependent on it economically. So once there is a dependence, then China would also open a lot of these information operations like the Chinese influence centers, the Confucius centers, etc. That is the reason why Europe is now closing them down, because they also double up as spreading Chinese propaganda, especially the CCP propaganda. So long story short, I don't see the de-risking happening anytime soon, because of the roots are very, very deep, but they are very serious about it. And one of the reasons why they are doubling down on Indo-Pacific and on countries like India or Singapore or all these parts is a part of the larger de-risking. So it is going to be a slow process. It is going to be a painful process, but I don't see that this is not going to happen. This is going to happen. The reason why it doesn't show results right now is because the embeddedness was too deep. So nobody, not India, we can't decouple from. Look at this, it's so strange. The more we export to the West, the more we import from China, because we are not a manufacturing hub. So when we have to export to the West, we have to first get the industrial goods from China. Okay. So what I'm saying is that the dependence factor has not been created in 1 year, 2 years, 3 years. The dependence factor on Chinese manufacturing has been created over a decade of, 2, 3, 4 decades. So the de-risking can't come in 2 days, 3 days or 2 years alone. It will take 10 years, 15 years for a meaningful de-risking. But the caveat here is, by then China would have also de-risked and created its own hub. So you have to take all of this into consideration. At the end of the day, I don't see that a fully paralyzed world is doing anybody any good. So some amount, the idea then is that de-risk and not decouple. And de-risking means building resilience in those supply chains. So nobody is saying that China will not be important for the EU or for the US or for India, but then it will not enjoy that dependence, that it is manipulating today.
True. Dr. Rao, for your doctoral studies, you have been in Japan. You spent about 5 years there.
Yeah.
You must have watched the movies of Akira Kurosawa.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, Last Samurai. Yeah.
Oh, okay. So, do you think the global south?
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay. So we have seen how the colonizers and the imperial powers like the British, the French, and the other colonial powers have killed the local culture. English has become an official tongue, same way the Spanish has become one of the massively spoken language. Who knows? Yeah, the Mandarin is going to be probably the next. So do you think it has an effect on global South culture? For example, will Netflix kills the own movie culture and popular culture of the global South, from Nigeria to the other countries like Iran, will be affected by Netflix imposition?
So very quickly, I think it's a very loaded question in its own way. I think today everybody understands that the highlighting the local culture also has its own market. So how do you deny that today the films that are doing well, like a lot of these OTT platforms are actually selling movies that are about small town India, about women, about villages, about these stories that emerge. So very quickly, yes, there is a tool of that dominant soft power, which is obviously coming from this Anglo-Saxon world about English and the Hollywood cinema and all of that, and James Bond, etc. But at the same time, I think the market is such, because that's one thing that internet has done to people's lives, that everybody now has an access to internet, and as a result, then there is also appetite for watching more things. And since you gave the example of Japan, so two things. One, that if you ask the Chinese and the South Koreans, they would say that, hello, Japan is also a colonial and imperialist power. Okay? So, Japan, yes, it started out...
but Japan is not in global South.
No, Japan is not in global South, and Japan actually was the only Asian country to have joined the imperialist bloc, so it was at the same party, it was at the same table, and then of course it saw its nemesis with the Second World War and whatever happened. Now very quickly, when it comes to language, I think why English becomes so indispensable for India is also because that we are a multilingual society, and then two Indians from different regions find it much more convenient to speak in English than say the regional language, and then there are also other egos that come into play, right? And that's why English is like the most convenient, or let's say the easiest way out. However, when you go to countries like Japan, for example, English is a problem. You better know Japanese if you go there, okay? Because even though they are so close to the Americans and they're so close to the American system, but frankly, beyond Tokyo, it would be very difficult. Even in Tokyo, it would be very difficult for you to manage if you don't know the language. So they take a lot of pride in their language and culture. And I have actually seen that in many parts of the world. So I think that's something that the Indians should learn, frankly, instead of criticizing. Because why is it that we have taken to English and not really promoting our own languages? I mean, it doesn't really necessarily happen. Go to France, people speak in French. Go to Japan, they speak in Japanese.
I see. Dr. Rao, to the COGGS viewers, is it possible to explain how the global security risks could influence the businesses and MNCs in the spread across global south?
Yeah, very quickly. Yes, of course, it has a major risk out there because
what sort of risk?
Yeah, because for example, when I speak about developmental projects, right? I said that global south and countries of the developing world so require these infrastructure development projects, etc. But if you go by what happened in the Middle East, for example, where there was this massive infrastructural project, connectivity project like IMEC was coming up. And you saw how...
Also China's project, including in Oman and a couple of...
Yeah. I mean, what I'm saying is that if you can see that a security crisis could go to an extent of literally derailing it, okay? And for the last 1.5 years, it's been completely on a back burner. So, and why do I say it's a problem? Is because, today, if you want to put an infrastructure project in place, you have to de-risk capital. You have to get private investors to invest in it, and they will not invest in something where the security situation is so haywire. So you need basic stability in order to go on with these plans. And since most of these things are happening in the global south, I think especially when it comes to the Western world, it becomes very difficult. Especially when it comes to the Western world, it becomes very difficult because they operate in that de-risking of finance way. Especially for most of the Western projects, right? I mean, if you have projects from democratic countries that are into, where the business is not completely subservient to the state, and the state doesn't take a decision on their behalf. The thing is that you have to attract investments, right? And how do you sell it? You sell it by convincing them that these investments are going to be safe. Okay, and but if there is a security risk, for example, the entire thing, the way that the IMEC project was literally thrown to the back burner after what happened in Israel, is a very good example to really understand the vulnerability, okay, of these projects. So security risks are always a major threat. Look at what is happening in the Red Sea. All of our trade, maritime commerce was going through the Red Sea, okay, through the Suez Canal and all. And after the Houthi attacks, we did not get the guarantees from the Houthis that they will not attack our ships. So every single Indian ship, like a commercial vessel, then started to reroute across the Cape of Good Hope, and that has led to 200% hike in the shipping costs, in the insurance, in the time, and everything. Why? Because the Houthis have completely destabilized the region. So the Indian Navy is there to respond to distress calls by other ships.
Exactly.
But it is not the same as saying that Indian ships are going from that region. So the kind of losses that we are incurring because of that security situation in the Red Sea, which is again a fallout of October 7 attack, goes on to say just how vulnerable the situation of international stability is with respect to how you want to the economic costs. Or the economic side, which is that they go hand in hand. If you have a situation where you cannot guarantee security of that particular region, if it is vulnerable to non-state actors attacks, it is vulnerable to all these things, then it becomes very difficult to get private investors to it. Then the only option you have, countries like China, where the big business is completely subservient to the state, and that is how they have been able to add to their network, not because they are not because they are not vulnerable to that risk. And if you get into the details of how the Chinese economic statecraft works, in fact they want a lot of stability. In fact, one of the reasons why China did not really the CPEC didn't really fly, or Chinese investments in Afghanistan didn't fly, was because they were so destabilized.
Yeah,
okay?
Exactly.
Yeah, they were very destabilized.
Even in Central Asia, it began from
so that it becomes very stabilized. But what I'm saying is that this is like choosing between the devil and the deep sea, where the Western investments are not coming, and then China comes and says that, listen, we don't care about your human rights situation and this and that. You sign up for this, you give us this particular strip, and then we can develop this for you. Sometimes it has worked, sometimes it has not worked, and that is why China's reputation is also not very good when it comes to all this. Okay, but what I'm saying is that yes, for the rest of the world and for the rest of the private investors, this is a very, very difficult situation because they do not want to risk their money. Look at what happened in COVID. The entire global trade lost so much money because of COVID and because of the shutting down of supply chains. Then came the Russia-Ukraine war. Then came the Arab, the Middle East situation. Then came the Red Sea situation. So we are living in extremely disturbed times, and this is a major problem for investments, especially in the developing countries.
So, do you think the state will employ the breed or the cousins of Wagner in future? For stabilizing and an investment purpose?
I don't think, honestly, the non-state actors are stabilizers. We have not seen that happening with Iran. See, these work as long as they are not exposed. Okay, so the non-state instruments are not the best way to ensure stability in any region. Iran tried that with 3 proxies: Hezbollah, Houthis, and Hamas. I don't think we need to overstate that the entire Middle Eastern region wants them to be eliminated because they are the major source of instability. Similarly, for Wagner has been a very important part of Russia's shadow, so to say, instrument of state policy. But if you ask me if Wagner is bringing stability into the region, I think frankly not, because it can bring stability only to an extent, because the reason why they are employed is because they give deniability. That is their biggest selling point. When you have these proxies, you can still get work done through these proxies that you would never get done through your state machinery. That is why these proxies work well in these primitive societies where the rule of law is not very strong, the institutions are not very strong, and that is the reason why they have thrived for so many years. But the minute it comes to taking responsibility, it becomes a problem. So yes, it is working fine today. I think Wagner is a very important source of income also for the Russian state, because all the diamond mining and all the Central African engagement that the Wagner does with respect to gold mining and diamond mining, and also on the crypto networks, okay, it is a big source of income for Russia. So far so good. But tomorrow they get involved into a civil war kind of a situation, the Russian state wouldn't take responsibility of what it is. Then it becomes a special forces or something. So I think it depends on which way you look at it. Yes, they do bring some benefit, but at the same time, you can't say that they are ways or they are tools to ensure that there is stability. I don't honestly think like that. Even though I know, and then it is also about what region are you talking about. So like proxies work well in a situation like Africa, where there have been so many failed states and there have been so many, like I said, the rule of law is not strong, the institutions are not strong, etc. That are very prone to civil war in these kind of situations. But the same proxies wouldn't work the same way in South Asia, where you have a different kind of a geopolitical outlook, or in other parts of Europe, or for in other. So it depends on what really are you wanting to get done, right? Why is it that they are getting into the drug dealing and this and that? So there is a particular kind of trade that the proxies will always do better compared to state machineries, because they have deniability that you don't have. So it's not stability. I wouldn't word it that way. I would say there is benefit, okay, but I'm not sure what is the longevity of that benefit, okay, because it is pertained to certain geographical situations with a certain geopolitical environment. You cannot apply that everywhere equally.
Thank you for joining us. We had with us for this special episode on COGGS, Dr. Swasti Rao, who is a Europe and Indo-Pacific specialist. Thank you for joining us.
It was a pleasure. Thank you.